When you're writing about your life, it can be almost impossible to decide where the story should end. After all, you're still living, right? You are still processing all of the things that you learned from the story you are writing in your memoir. But of course, your memoir has to end at some point. We've got to get it done, revised, and sent off to publishers. Well, today I want to talk through one of the most common questions I get in our group program, the Memoir Method, which is, where do I end this story? Stay tuned. Do you keep getting stuck in your memoir because you don't know how to make a plan? Well, so did Rita before she joined the Memoir Method.
That's
I know.
awesome
I'm
though.
very
Yeah.
excited. So, I mean, I love your system then because I'm like, it really works. I guess like I
Yeah,
can talk to it because it's never worked for me and I've written
same.
forever. And I'm like, I guess, and plus I think the accountability helps. Like coming on here once a week,
Mm,
I'm like, it's worth the input and like, giving the money over and stuff because it just this alone has like, I mean,
yep,
it's incredible how much
it's
accountability.
priceless.
Learn more at pageandpodium.com/memoir-method. So I get this question a lot about where should the end of my memoir be? And oftentimes this will come up in the memoir method because we are usually working with women in that group who are working through a difficult time in their life that taught them something really important. And what makes this really difficult in terms of figuring out an ending of your book is that you are usually still living by whatever that lesson was, right? So typically, even if the incident you're writing about or the series of events you're writing about, even if that happened years ago, oftentimes we have to really grapple with the fact that we are still trying to make sure that we get that lesson into our life, right? We are still seeing examples of it. We are still having to think about that lesson and make sure we're applying it. But of course, all good things have to come to an end. And when we're talking about our memoir, we have to make sure that there is a point at which the reader can close the book, literally and proverbially, and feel really satisfied that they have come away with something super, super valuable. So, I want to share with you a 4-step process that we teach in the Memoir Method that you can use today and come up with the end of your memoir. Even if you're still living this experience, even if it has been years ago, whatever your circumstances, you can use these 4 steps. Figure out the end of your memoir. So, to talk through this, I want to use as an example Victor James Hill's book, The Ignorant Man's Son. And I think this is a great example because this is an inspirational memoir. It is about going through kind of a lifelong struggle and something that he still kind of thinks about and grapples with today, by the way. And because it is a textbook example of how you can use the ending of your memoir to your advantage to make sure that the pacing in that book feels really good to your reader and that they come away having learned something. So let me give you kind of a quick overview of Victor's book so that then as I move through these steps, I'll use the book as an example. Now, if you have not picked up this book, you must pick up this book. Truly, it is so good, especially if you love an inspiring tearjerker. If you love any kind of like Christian themes, you are going to love this book. Trust me. Go over to Amazon or really anywhere that you would buy books. The Ignorant Man's Son by Victor James Hill. Okay. What is this book about? So, Victor James Hill grew up outside of Detroit, and one of the things that he really grappled with his whole life was that he did not grow up with his father. Now, his father was around. He knew who his father was, but he really didn't ever feel that he was kind of mentored or supported. And he really felt like he was missing something because his father wasn't in the home and kind of parenting him the way that he really imagined that he should have been. So, as he kind of grew up, as he got older into his adult years, one thing that he starts to kind of get into is he's getting into some kind of illegal activity, some kind of harmful things. He's seeing a lot of kind of violence happening around him, and he really is struggling with not knowing what to do. He really feels like if I'd had a father, I would know what to do. I would have some kind of support and some mentoring. So as he goes through, he ends up coaching a basketball team for kids in his community. He really wants to get them off the street and get them kind of out of the drug wars that start to happen in the 80s and 90s. And as he's going through that process, the thing that he learns from that is that even though he didn't have a father, he can kind of fill that hole in his heart by becoming a father figure for other people. It's a very, very sweet story, and I promise, even though I just spoiled it, I promise it is worth a read because you will see kind of how he does this work, and it's going to be really, really helpful as an example of a memoir for you. Okay, but so now you've got that baseline. I want to go through what these 4 steps are, and I'll just refer back to that book. So pick it up, read it. It'll help you with this video. Otherwise, I'll try to talk through and give you enough context so that you are going to be able to piece it together. Okay, so the first thing that you are going to need to do to figure out the ending of your memoir is you need to choose your key message. Now, in the Memoir Method group program, we separate out core topic from key message. Your core topic is just simply if someone said, "Oh, what's your book about?" What would you tell them? Usually just a few words, maybe a sentence. So Victor's book would be about mentoring this basketball team. That's what the bulk of the book is about, right? So even though the message he's trying to get across is something a little bit different than that, really, when we tell people what this book is about, we need to say it's about mentoring this basketball team of kids, watching them grow up, etc. The key message is very different, as I kind of teased earlier, right? The key message is that when we feel unsupported, when we feel unloved, the best way to kind of reclaim that thing that we feel like we're missing is to offer it to others. Well, that's an amazing message. And I want to point something out here that I think is really, really important as you're developing your key message for yourself. And that is that even though Victor's kind of talking about basketball, kind of talking about growing up in the projects outside Detroit, that key message could apply to just about anybody, right? That key message is what I would call an umbrella of truth. Even if you haven't lived what Victor lived, you will be able to take that message away and think about what it might mean in your own life, the way that you could apply it to do good in this world. So we need our core topic and we need our key message. But really what we're going to be interacting with the most in this video is that key message. So Victor gets that message across all the way through the book, but when we're thinking about the message, we want to kind of keep that in mind because it's going to help us through the next step. Now, the second thing that I want you to do after you've got that key message is I want you to think about when in your journey you really understood that message. Now, I'm going to distinguish in a second in the next step because this is a little bit tricky. I'm not talking about the point in your life that you had this down pat, that it wasn't even, it was just as natural as breathing. Most of us never even get there, actually. These key messages, if they're really kind of universalized and really powerful enough, oftentimes they're kind of lifelong journeys. What I'm talking about is the moment that you had the aha. We call this the epiphany in the Memoir Method, but the moment that you really understood kind of what life was trying to teach you. Now, that should happen about 3/4 of the way through your memoir, at about 75%. And knowing that can be really, really helpful in understanding how your memoir is going to end. So how do we kind of see this show up? How do we see this epiphany show up in Victor's book? Well, one thing as he's going through is that he is kind of mentoring these kids. But what you see early in the book is that he's sort of mentoring. I mean, he likes basketball. It's like kind of a fun thing to do. He wants the kids off the street. But he gets close to them in a way that is kind of a little sneaky. He isn't necessarily going out there and kind of trying to be their father, right? He's going out there and, he's trying to do something good in his community. Well, what happens around 3/4 of the way through is that those kids get older and they start to have some hard times in their life, right? They start to, for example, one of them is kind of experimenting with sex. And Victor has to kind of step in and really, have this kind of uncomfortable conversation with this kid. He's not actually his father, but he knows that this child, he's a teenager, right? He knows that this kid really needs that mentoring. He needs that advice. And what is such an aha for Victor is he realizes that he did not have that mentoring around that particular topic when he needed it. And in fact, we had learned earlier in the book, and then it's driven home kind of at the 75% mark, that actually is that sex, the idea of sex in women is like really something that bothered him a lot when he was kind of coming into his adulthood, is that he really thought, if I had a father, he could help me kind of understand. But since he didn't have a father, he really felt kind of at sea. He felt like he kind of was missing a lot of jokes. He kind of felt like he was getting made fun of a little bit. So this was a moment where he kind of realized, oh my gosh, I have an opportunity where I can kind of fill this gap for somebody else. And then when he does it, he realizes, oh, it's not the father, it's the relationship. So that he can still have that relationship even though he's not this child's father and even though he didn't really feel like he had a father. So we're going to look for that aha, that epiphany, when you finally realize the lesson that you needed to learn. This, by the way, is also the lesson that you're trying to teach your reader. So having it around 75%, that is really useful because your reader has really built that up with you kind of along the way as they're reading. Okay, so once you have figured out where that epiphany happens, that's step 2, we're going to move on to step 3. And at this point, we are figuring out your climax. Now, many people get super, super intimidated by thinking about what the climax of your book is, and I get it. Most of us, when we're learning about climaxes, either in books or movies, we're kind of told that it's like car explosions, right? It's like the most exciting thing that's ever happened. Many, many memoirs don't have any point in them at all that is like that. You do not need a car chase. You do not need a huge dramatic show. What you need, what your climax is the point at which you had to use that lesson or you were going to fail. And it usually is kind of hard for you to stick to it. It usually is a moment in your life where you kind of had to struggle. You really had to push yourself, get out of your comfort zone, and really hold true to this epiphany that you learned just a little bit earlier and see it through to the end. So that this is a process of mastery where we get to see you work through, okay, I learned this lesson, but what does it mean for me to really apply it at a time that it's really hard to do that? All right. So when we talk about a climax, it's not car chases, right? It's you learning. It's you growing. That is what a memoir is about. So your climax should be a really good example of that. Now, in Victor's memoir, he is working with these kids kind of all the way through the book, right? And he's kind of learning, he's experimenting with different ways of kind of mentoring them as he gets, past that 75% mark. There are lots of other opportunities like that. What happens in the climax? I'm so sorry for the spoiler alert because this is a very sweet book and I really want you to pick it up. But what happens in this climax is that he learns with no warning that one of the boys' mothers is dying of cancer, like that night. So she has basically not told anyone because she didn't want anyone to, worry about her, kind of dote on her. So she didn't tell anyone. Well, so he gets this call, this panicked call from one of these boys that he has, helped to raise for his whole life, saying that, his mom something's wrong with his mom. So at that moment, Victor has to go over there and he has to really embrace, what does it mean? What does it mean to guide someone through one of the hardest things that you have ever dealt with in your life? Now, Victor had gone through that himself and he had not had a mentor. He had lost his mother and he had really had to, kind of step in and take the leadership role on that, even though, he really was hurting. He really needed someone to lean on. When he gets into this opportunity where he gets to really assess the situation, he gets to step up, he gets to be this really supportive figure for this kid, this teenager. He really has to practice what he has been preaching, right? He really has to stick with it, even though it is so painful for him to be there with this kid, kind of see this guy suffer and know what he's going through because he went through it himself. That is the climax of his book. And the way that it's told, of course, it's quite dramatic. So it's not a car chase, but there is a lot of build. One of the reviews said it could get, remember she said tears out of a turnip or something like that, which is true. It's like it's a tearjerker kind of a climax. But it is a little bit more interior, right? It's not any kind of like dramatic thing. In fact, much more dramatic things happen earlier in the book when we're thinking about like an action movie. It is the moment where he has to grapple with this lesson and he has to claim it. There's no halfway, there's no, backing out. He has to claim this lesson. Okay, so that's the third thing you're going to do is you're going to figure out what is the climax of your book. What is the point where you had to stick to your guns and really exercise this process of figuring out how you were going to apply this lesson even when times got really, really tough. Okay, and then the fourth step is actually pretty easy once you've gotten through those first three, which I realize are not any kind of piece of cake, right? The fourth step is you have to figure out what is the quickest way to resolve that previous scene and any questions that came up during it. So, usually, the climax is going to come around the 90% mark. It's later than you think. Readers do not want to get to kind of this lesson and then you're kind of going on and on and on and on. You want to be able to get to the end of that book, to the resolution, pretty quickly. So for Victor, he had to tie up a couple of ends, but the main thing that we're showing here, again, the key message is what's going to guide all these decisions. He had to think about relationships, community, mentorship, and support. So the easiest way he could do this is by thinking about all of the changes that had happened in this community where he grew up, where he had mentored these boys, who had supported him mentoring these boys. So he has an epilogue that is the end of this book that really talks through how he sees this boy whose mother had died at the end. And they're at a basketball game together. It's a chance meeting that they are sitting together on the bleachers and they're kind of having this conversation. And the boy says, it's my mama's birthday. And it is such a moving little piece of resolution because shows how much they were bonded while also putting that story into such an everyday experience, right? They're at a basketball game. I think it's the state playoffs for the high school that they both went to. So as we think about that resolution, it doesn't have to be, long and drawn out. You don't have to necessarily go into every detail of kind of resolving every single thing you've brought up in the book. We just need a really satisfying ending that shows that after you applied this lesson, after you did this really, really hard thing, you could go back to a relatively normal life. You're changed. You're not the same as you were, but it is a relatively normal life. We can see how you're going to move forward. That is the way that you're going to have this satisfying ending to your book, and that is the way you're going to decide what that closing scene, what that closing idea is going to be of your book. Okay, I know all of this is easier said than done. These 4 steps are probably going to take you quite a lot of thinking. But one thing I do want to say is the more you can get community support, the more you can get feedback on this stuff, the more that key message is going to develop and grow and change and become something that is so, so, so special. And the way I know that is that we just had our June cohort of the Memoir Method. They are really wrapping up their outlines. And one thing I want to say is, as they have worked through kind of where does this end? What is my key message? That is something we have been very involved with them in terms of helping to shape that. So if it is something that sounds like you could use some support with, thinking about how do I make sure that that message is front and center? How do I make sure that this is a satisfying book for my readers? How do I even, have the accountability to get through? That is something that I'm very proud to offer in the Memoir Method. So I'm going to talk a little bit more about that after this bumper. This is a really good time to enroll, by the way. There is a free bonus, so stay tuned and I'll tell you about it in a second. But I would really love to see you in that group. I know that we can really help you through this process that can be, I know, really intimidating, but I also know that you can do it. So reach out. I will talk to you soon. Happy writing. Free advice on YouTube is great, but if you really want to finish your memoir, you need a lot more than that. You need customized tutorials, you need accountability, you need a community of like-minded writers just like you, and you need targeted support from professionals who know your book, care about your project, and are there to help whenever you need us. And you can get all of that in the Memoir Method. This very small curated group of women is the perfect place to finish your memoir. And if you sign up up now through September 26th, you will get a free outline review session. This is a priceless extra that is going to help you feel so confident as you move from the planning stages into the writing stages and on to publishing and marketing, all of which is included in our program. This is a 9-month program, and you can learn more about it at pageandpodium.com/memoir-method, or head right over to apply at pageandpodium.com/apply. I'm so excited to see you there.